The English countryside is not beautiful here. It is bruised. The sky is a suffocating canvas of oxidized iron and rotting plum, bleeding away the last remnants of daylight. The wind doesn't howl, it drags. It pulls through the jagged, skeletal branches of ancient hawthorn trees with the sound of a lung struggling for air. At the end of a winding, gravel-choked driveway sits Harrowgate House. It is a sprawling Victorian monolith of slate and blackened brick, jutting out of the earth like a jagged tooth. The windows are tall, narrow, and dark, staring out at the moors with a kind of predatory indifference. The heavy, rhythmic crunch asterisk of tires on gravel breaks the ambient dread. An old, mud-splattered Volvo estate car slowly crawls toward the structure, its headlights cutting weak, yellow swaths through the rapidly thickening fog. Volvo estate continuous asterisk behind the wheel sits Eliasthorne, late 30s. He is a man who looks as though he has been awake for a decade. The skin beneath his eyes is stained with the deep, bruised purple of chronic insomnia. His cheekbones are sharp, his posture rigid. He clutches the steering wheel with white knuckles, his eyes locked on the looming silhouette of the house. He doesn't look like a man coming home. He looks like a man walking to the gallows. The heater in the car hums, but Elia's breath still plumes in the cold air of the cabin. He reaches a trembling hand to the dashboard, turning off the ignition. The engine shudders and dies. In the sudden, deafening silence, the only sound is the frantic, uneven thud of Elia's own heartbeat in his ears. Harrowgate House. Moments later, Elias steps out into the biting cold. The air here tastes like wet ash and old copper. He pulls a heavy wool coat tight around his thin frame, staring up at the facade of the house. It was left to him by an uncle he barely knew, a recluse who died violently of natural causes. Elias grabs a single leather duffel bag from the passenger seat. He walks toward the heavy oak front doors. The gravel beneath his boots sounds uncomfortably loud, like snapping bones in the quiet evening. He inserts a heavy, iron skeleton key into the lock. It turns with a sickening, metallic screech that echoes across the empty moors. Harrowgate House. Foyer continuous asterisk. Elias pushes the door open. The smell hits him instantly, a physical, heavy wall of scent. It is the odor of undisturbed centuries, dried lavender, decomposing silk, damp wood, and a faint, metallic tang beneath it all, like old blood trapped beneath the floorboards. The foyer is a cavern of dark mahogany and peeling damask wallpaper. Dust motes dance lazily in the weak beam of Elias' flashlight. Shadows stretch and distort against the walls, clinging to the corners of the room as if trying to hide. Elias breathes in, the cold, stale air scratching at the back of his throat. He doesn't turn on the main lights. He doesn't want to see everything at once. He begins to climb the grand staircase. The wooden steps groan under his weight, long, drawn-out, agonizing creaks that sound entirely too human. Second floor hallway continuous asterisk. The hallway is a narrow, suffocating tunnel. Portraits of forgotten ancestors line the walls, their eyes obscured by layers of dust and grime. Elias ignores them, his boots thudding softly against a threadbare runner rug. He reaches the end of the hall. The door to the master bedroom is thicker than the rest, carved with intricate, twisting vines that seem to writhe in the beam of his flashlight. He rests his hand on the brass doorknob. It is freezing, biting into his palm with a literal chill. He turns it. INT. Master bedroom continuous asterisk. The master bedroom is vast and oppressively silent. The air in here is at least 10 degrees colder than the hallway. Elia's breath immediately forms thick clouds in front of his face. Most of the furniture is draped in heavy, yellowing canvas drop cloths, looking like forgotten ghosts huddled in the dark. In the center of the room is a massive, four-poster bed, its dark wood posts reaching toward the high ceiling like skeletal fingers. But Elia's eyes are immediately drawn to the far wall. Standing there is an object of immense, undeniable gravity. It is a floor-to-ceiling Victorian-looking glass, resting in a frame of intricately carved blackened mahogany. However, the glass itself is completely concealed beneath a thick, black velvet drape. Elias drops his duffel bag on the floor. It lands with a heavy, dead thud. He walks slowly toward the covered mirror. There is a strange, magnetic pull to it. The silence in the room seems to concentrate around the object, swallowing the ambient noise of the house. Elias reaches out. The black velvet is thick, coarse, and unnaturally cold to the touch. He grips the edge of the fabric. With a sharp tug, he pulls the drape down. A cloud of gray dust erupts into the air, catching in Elia's throat, forcing a harsh cough from his lungs. The heavy velvet pools at his feet like a dead animal. Elias raises his flashlight to illuminate the glass. The mirror is ancient. The silver backing is tarnished and mottled with dark, creeping spots of oxidation, giving the glass a murky, liquid quality. It doesn't look like a solid surface. It looks like a vertical pool of dark water standing perfectly still. Elias steps directly in front of the massive glass. He lowers his flashlight, expecting to see his exhausted, hollowed-out face staring back at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. He looks into the glass. His eyes widen. The blood completely drains from his face. The mirror reflects the room with perfect, terrifying clarity. It reflects the four-poster bed behind him. It reflects the peeling wallpaper. It reflects the yellowing canvas drop cloths covering the furniture. It does not reflect Elias. Elias freezes. The silence in the room suddenly becomes deafening, a high-pitched ringing in his ears. His mind struggles, gears grinding violently against this impossible visual information. He blinks hard, rubbing his eyes with trembling fingers. Insomnia, he tells himself. Auditory and visual hallucinations. Day 3 of no sleep. He opens his eyes. The space in the mirror where he should be standing is empty. The reflection shows the wooden floorboards, perfectly continuous. A slow, creeping numbness begins at the base of Elia's spine and crawls upward, wrapping around his throat like a cold wire. He takes a slow, agonizing step to the left. In the mirror, the room shifts perfectly, the perspective changing exactly as it should. But there is no Elias. He raises his right hand, holding it inches from the cold surface of the glass. He can feel the temperature radiating from it, a deep, subterranean chill. In the mirror, there is nothing. Just the far wall of the bedroom. Panic, raw and primal, begins to claw at the inside of his chest. His breathing becomes shallow and ragged. The sound of his own hyperventilation seems entirely divorced from the dead silence of the mirrored room. He reaches out and touches the glass. His fingertips meet the cold, hard surface. The tactile sensation is real. In the mirror, a smudge of grease appears on the glass, floating in midair, entirely unattached to any physical hand. Elias yanks his hand back as if he has been burned. He stumbles backward, his heel catching on the edge of the velvet drape on the floor. He falls backward, hitting the dusty wooden floorboards hard. He scrambles backward, pushing himself away from the glass like a cornered animal, until his back hits the solid wood of the bed frame. He sits there in the dark, his knees pulled to his chest, staring at the massive expanse of silvered glass. The moonlight casts long, distorted shadows across the room. In the mirror, the room is perfectly still, perfectly empty. Minutes bleed into hours. Elias does not move. The sheer psychological terror of his own absence paralyses him. If he is not in the mirror, does he exist? Is he already a ghost in his own house? The sensory disconnect threatens to shatter his fragile, sleep-deprived mind. The temperature in the room continues to drop. Frost begins to form delicate, crystalline fern patterns on the edges of the window panes. Elias' eyelids grow incredibly heavy. The crushing weight of his insomnia is finally overpowering his terror. His body is shutting down, demanding rest, even in the face of the impossible. He slowly climbs up onto the mattress. It is old, stiff, and smells of mothballs. He pulls a dusty, moth-eaten wool blanket over his shivering shoulders. He lies on his side, his face turned directly toward the mirror. He cannot look away from it. He watches the reflection of the empty bed in the dark glass. The moonlight hits the tarnished silver, making it glow with a sickly, pale luminescence. His eyes slowly drift shut. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of an old pocket watch on the mantel suddenly seems incredibly loud. Elias fights it. He opens his eyes, a mere slit, his lashes blurring his vision. He looks through the darkness, through his half-closed eyelids, toward the mirror. His heart stops. In the mirror, the bed is no longer empty. There is a figure lying in the reflected bed. It is Elias. The reflection of his own body lying on its side, eyes tightly closed, deep in slumber. Elias' breath catches in his throat. He is completely awake, lying in the real bed, staring at the glass. But the mirror only shows him asleep. The creeping dread turns to absolute, freezing terror. As Elias watches through the tiny sliver of his open eyelids, the reflection of his sleeping body in the mirror begins to stir. The Elias in the glass slowly, methodically, pushes the wool blanket down. The real Elias in the bed remains completely frozen, entirely paralyzed by fear, his hands clutching the blanket tight to his chest. In the mirror, the sleeping figure slowly sits up on the edge of the bed. It doesn't open its eyes. The eyelids remain tightly, peacefully shut. The sleeping reflection turns its head. Even with its eyes closed, Elias can feel the immense, crushing weight of its gaze locked directly onto him through the glass. In the mirror, the blind, sleeping Elias slowly stands up from the bed. It turns its body toward the glass, toward the real Elias. And then, with agonizing slowness, the reflection begins to walk toward the surface of the mirror, step by silent step, approaching the boundary between its world and his. The air in the master bedroom of Harrowgate House has ceased to be air. It is a physical weight, a suffocating, sub-zero pressure that presses against Elias Thorne's eardrums until they ache. Through the impossibly thin sliver of his open eyelids, Elias remains paralyzed on the moth-eaten mattress, watching the impossible unfold in the massive, silver-backed looking glass. The entity, his own sleeping reflection, is walking toward the surface of the mirror. It moves with a terrifying, fluid grace that Elias' own exhausted body hasn't possessed in years. There is no hesitation in its stride, no unevenness. It simply glides across the reflected floorboards, its arms hanging loosely by its sides, its head tilted slightly downward, and its eyes remain fused shut. It is profoundly, deeply asleep, yet guided by a predatory sonar focused entirely on the waking man on the bed. Thump, thump, thump. The sound is not coming from the mirror. The mirror is a vacuum of absolute silence. The sound is Elia's own heart, hammering against his ribs like a trapped, frantic bird. The sleeping reflection reaches the boundary. It stops. In the reflection, Elias can see it standing mere inches from the glass. The proximity is deeply violating. The entity raises a pale, perfectly still hand. It extends its index finger and presses it against the inside of the glass. In the real world, in the freezing master bedroom, a sharp, violent asterisk crack echoes through the silence. Where the entity's finger touches the reflection, a spiderweb of crystalline frost detonates on the real surface of the mirror. The ice branches outward with the agonizing sound of splintering bone. The paralysis gripping Elias shatters alongside the ambient silence. Pure, unadulterated adrenaline floods his system, overriding days of profound sleep deprivation. He erupts from the bed. He doesn't bother with the blanket, doesn't bother with his shoes. His bare feet hit the freezing wooden floorboards, the impact sending violent jars of pain up his shins. He lunges backward, tearing his gaze away from the glass. He doesn't look to see if the thing in the mirror reacts to his movement. He simply turns and sprints for the heavy oak door. He grasps the brass doorknob. It is coated in a thin layer of condensation that has instantly frozen into a rime of ice. It burns his palm, but he rips the door open, throws his weight through the threshold, and slams the heavy wood shut behind him. He stands in the dark, narrow hallway of the second floor, his back pressed flat against the door, his chest heaving as he pulls in jagged, desperate lungfuls of stale air. He waits for the sound of a fist hammering against the wood from the inside. He waits for the handle to turn. Nothing. The house remains dead, swallowed in a sepulchral quiet. Elias pushes himself away from the door and stumbles down the hall. The portraits of the forgotten ancestors seem to sneer at him in the suffocating darkness, their painted eyes tracking his frantic, stumbling retreat. He grips the mahogany banister of the grand staircase, his knuckles white, and practically throws himself down the steps. His bare feet slap against the threadbare runner rug, kicking up plumes of century-old dust that coat the back of his throat like ash. He bursts into the ground floor foyer and veers sharply toward the kitchen, desperate for light, desperate for anything grounded in the real, physical world. He hits the light switch. A single, bare, low-wattage bulb flickers to life, casting harsh, yellow, sickly light across cracked porcelain tiles and rusting cast-iron fixtures. Elias collapses against the slate countertop, gripping the edge until his fingers go numb. He hangs his head, his breathing slowly decelerating from a frantic panic to a ragged, wet wheeze. "Hallucination," he whispers into the empty kitchen. His voice sounds thin and brittle like dry leaves scraping across concrete. "It's just the insomnia, severe sleep deprivation, visual cortex misfiring, microsleeps causing hypnagogic hallucinations." He repeats the clinical terms like a rosary, a desperate prayer to science and reason. But the icy sting on his palm from the frozen doorknob remains undeniably, aggressively real. He needs water. He reaches for the faucet above the deep porcelain sink and twists the corroded brass handle. The pipes groan, a deep, guttural belch from the bowels of the house, before spitting out a stream of brown, metallic-smelling water. He lets it run until it clears to a cloudy gray, cups his trembling hands, and splashes the freezing liquid onto his face. The shock of the cold water snaps his mind back to a razor-thin edge of lucidity. He reaches for a tattered dish towel hanging on the oven handle and dries his face. He looks up, instinctively expecting to meet his own gaze in the mirror above the sink. He stops. There is a wooden frame bolted to the wall above the sink, but the glass is gone. It hasn't been shattered. It has been methodically, cleanly removed. Only the bare, yellowing drywall remains behind the wooden border. A new, creeping unease settles into Elia's stomach. He grabs his flashlight from the foyer and begins a frantic, methodical sweep of the ground floor. He moves into the parlor. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn shut, trapping the stale air. He shines the beam over the mantel. A large, ornate rectangular space in the wallpaper is visibly less faded than the rest of the wall, but the mirror that once hung there is absent. He moves to the downstairs water closet. No mirror. The cloakroom. No mirror. The dining hall. The massive mirrored backing of the antique liquor cabinet has been violently smashed out, shards of silvered glass still glittering in the deep grooves of the wood. His uncle didn't just die here. His uncle had systematically eradicated every single reflective surface in the entire house. Every surface except the massive, velvet-draped-looking glass in the master bedroom. The one that was too heavy, too integrated, or perhaps too terrifying to move. Elias returns to the kitchen. He is shivering violently now, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that he cannot suppress. He fills a rusted kettle and places it on the gas stove, striking a match with trembling fingers to light the burner. He sits at the small, rotting wooden table in the center of the kitchen and waits for dawn. The next 4 hours are a masterclass in psychological torture. This is the beginning of day 4 without sleep. The human body is not designed to sustain consciousness for this long. The chemical buildup in his brain begins to break down the barrier between reality and nightmare. The microsleeps begin. Elias is staring at the blue flame of the gas burner. He blinks. Suddenly, he is looking at a completely dark kitchen. The flame is out. Hours have passed. He jerks violently, his heart seizing in his chest, only to realize his eyes are still focused on the blue flame. It was a lapse in consciousness that lasted mere milliseconds, but it felt like an eternity of lost time. His peripheral vision begins to betray him. Shadows in the corners of the kitchen detach themselves from the walls, writhing and twisting like black oil, only to snap back into rigid stillness the moment he turns his head to look at them directly. The silence of the house amplifies. He can hear the blood rushing through his own carotid arteries. A wet, heavy, rhythmic asterisk shhhhshhhshhhshhh that sounds like something dragging heavy canvas across a stone floor. When the kettle finally shrieks, Elias nearly falls out of his chair. He pours the boiling water over a spoonful of ancient, solidified instant coffee he found in a tin. The resulting sludge tastes of dirt and burned copper, but he forces it down, welcoming the harsh, scalding pain in his throat as an anchor to the waking world. Gray, lifeless dawn finally bleeds through the dirt-caked windows of the kitchen. It brings no comfort, only the stark, depressing reality of his situation. The moors outside are swallowed in a thick, pea-soup fog, isolating Harrowgate House from the rest of humanity. Elias knows he cannot leave. His car is parked outside, but he realizes with a sinking horror that he left his keys in his duffel bag. His duffel bag is upstairs, in the master bedroom with the glass. He cannot go back up there. Not yet. He needs answers. If his uncle lived in this house with that asterisk thing, he must have left something behind. A reason. A warning. Elias spends the morning tearing through the ground floor. The fatigue makes his limbs feel like they are filled with wet lead. Every movement requires a conscious, agonizing effort of will. Just before noon, he finds it. At the back of the house, behind a heavy oak door that had been painted shut, is his uncle's study. Elias kicks the door violently, the rusted hinges giving way with a scream of protesting metal. The study is a monument to paranoia. The windows have been boarded up from the inside with thick planks of reclaimed wood, large iron nails driven viciously into the frames. The air is stagnant, smelling strongly of dried ink, rotting leather, and unwashed humanity. The walls are covered in thousands of frantic, overlapping charcoal sketches. Elias shines his flashlight over them. They are all variations of the same image. A tall, impossibly thin figure with its eyes tightly shut, standing behind a pane of glass. Over and over again. Some sketches are detailed. Others are just frantic, violent slash marks of black carbon against the peeling wallpaper. In the center of the room sits a massive mahogany desk, buried under mountains of scattered paper, empty inkwells, and the rotting remnants of uneaten food. Elias collapses into the leather chair behind the desk. A cloud of dust puffs into the air. He begins clawing through the papers, his vision blurring, his eyes burning as if they are filled with fine sand. He finds a stack of leather-bound journals. They are not chronological, they are scattered and frantic. He opens the top one. The handwriting is tight, jagged, and manic. October 14 th. It only moves when I rest. It feeds on the vulnerability of the closed eye, the somnambulist. It is a parasite of the unconscious. When I am awake, it is trapped in the silver. When I sleep, it walks. Elias flips the pages, his breath catching in his throat. November 2nd. Smashed the ones in the hall today. Couldn't bear the empty rooms looking back at me. But the big one upstairs, I can't touch it. I raised a hammer to it and the glass. It didn't reflect the hammer. It reflected the somnambulist standing right at the boundary, smiling with its eyes closed. If I break the glass, do I break the cage? Or do I just remove the door? I cannot risk it. I must simply remain awake. Elias reads entry after entry, documenting a man's descent into utter, sleep-deprived madness. His uncle had calculated the speed of the entity. He had determined that for every hour he slept, the reflection took one step closer to the surface of the glass. December 12 th. My heart is failing. The palpitations are constant. My chest feels as though it is wrapped in iron wire. The doctors called it a cardiac episode. Fools, it is the toll of the waking mind. The body demands rest, but to rest is to invite it through. I can hear it upstairs, pacing, waiting for my eyes to shut. I will not sleep. I will not sleep. I will not sleep. The entries degrade into illegible scrawls, endless repetitions of the phrase "I am awake, I am awake, I am awake," stretching across dozens of pages until the ink runs out. Elias drops the journal. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. His uncle didn't die of natural causes. His heart gave out. The sheer, unadulterated torture of forced, prolonged insomnia had literally worked his heart to death. He had chosen a fatal cardiac arrest over falling asleep. Elias looks down at his own trembling hands. His fingernails are tinged blue. His chest aches with a dull, persistent pressure. The hereditary weakness of the thorn heart. He is already on day 4. How much longer before his own heart simply stops beating? He cannot survive the insomnia, but if he sleeps, the somnambulist reaches the glass. And what happens when it crosses the threshold? As afternoon bleeds into a murky, suffocating dusk, the auditory hallucinations intensify. Elias sits frozen in the study. He hears the distinct, rhythmic creak of the floorboards on the second floor. Creak, 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 slow, methodical, pacing. He knows it is mathematically impossible. The entity only moves when he is asleep. But his brain, starved of REM cycles, is generating nightmares while he is wide awake. He squeezes his eyes shut for just a second to massage his pounding temples. In that single second of darkness, the temperature in the study plummets. He snaps his eyes open. Standing in the corner of the study, entirely devoid of a mirror, is a towering, impossibly thin shadow. It has no features, just a silhouette of absolute, consuming darkness. Elias screams, a raw, ragged sound that tears his throat. He throws a heavy glass inkwell at the shadow. It shatters against the empty wall. The shadow is gone, just a hallucination, just the mind breaking. But Elias realizes he is out of time. His body is shutting down. His organs are beginning to fail from the stress. If he stays down here, he will die of a heart attack within 48 hours, just like his uncle. He will die terrified, alone in the dark. He has only one option. He must destroy the mirror. He must take the risk his uncle was too cowardly to take. He must break the cage. He leaves the study. He walks to the massive fireplace in the parlor and picks up a solid, wrought-iron fire poker. It is incredibly heavy, its pointed tip rusted and lethal. The weight of the iron in his hand provides a grim sense of comfort. He walks to the base of the grand staircase. The house is completely dark now. Night has fully claimed Harrowgate House. He begins the ascent. Every step is an agony of effort. His joints scream, his vision tunnels. The air grows noticeably colder with every stair he climbs, a creeping, unnatural frost that bites through his wool coat. He reaches the second-floor landing. The hallway stretches out before him, a tunnel of absolute black. He clicks his flashlight on, illuminating the heavy, vine-carved door of the master bedroom. He walks toward it. The iron poker scrapes lightly against the wooden wall, the sound sharp and metallic in the dead air. He stops in front of the door. The ice has returned to the doorknob. Elias takes a deep, ragged breath. He raises the iron poker, resting it on his shoulder like a baseball bat. He reaches out, grips the freezing brass knob and turns it. He kicks the door open. He steps into the master bedroom, bringing the flashlight beam up to illuminate the far wall. The massive mirror stands in the center of the room, catching the beam of light and reflecting it back with a sickly, oxidized glare. Elias tightens his grip on the heavy iron poker. He steps forward, ready to swing with every last ounce of failing strength he possesses in his dying body. He looks into the glass to aim his strike. He freezes. The reflection of the room is there. The bed, the draped furniture, the peeling wallpaper. But the sleeping reflection of Elias is not on the bed. It is not walking toward the glass. The sleeping entity is standing directly at the boundary of the mirror. Its face is mere millimeters from the silver surface. It is so close that Elias can see the hyper-realistic detail of its pale, dead skin, the dark, bruised circles under its closed eyes, the slight, terrifying upward curve of its lips. It is smiling. Elias raises the heavy iron poker high above his head, letting out a primal, exhausted roar of pure terror and rage. He brings the solid iron crashing down toward the center of the glass. The impact of the solid iron poker against the ancient, silver-backed glass does not produce the expected cacophony of shattering destruction. It does not burst into 1,000 glittering fragments. Instead, a sound tears through the master bedroom that defies natural physics, a deep, resonant, subsonic boom that vibrates in the marrow of Elia's bones, akin to a massive glacier violently calving into a frozen sea. The heavy iron tip strikes dead center on the reflection of the somnambulist's smiling, closed-eye face. But the poker does not break the glass. It sinks into it. Elia's forward momentum carries him into the swing, but the iron abruptly stops 3 inches deep into the silver surface, gripped by a sudden, impossible density. The sensation traveling up the iron shaft and into Elia's hands is not the hard vibration of hitting a solid object. It is a rapid, localized drop in temperature so severe that the moisture on his palms instantly flash freezes, bonding his skin to the metal. He gasps, a sharp intake of icy air, and tries to wrench the weapon backward. It refuses to budge. In the murky depths of the glass, the sleeping entity's smile widens, stretching the pale skin of its cheeks taut. Slowly, methodically, it raises its hands, perfect, horrific mirror images of Elia's own, and wraps its long, unnaturally white fingers around the iron shaft protruding into its world. The entity does not open its eyes. It simply grips the metal. A surge of kinetic force, cold and immensely powerful, travels up the iron. Elias feels his shoulders wrench forward, his joints popping agonizingly in their sockets. He is being pulled into the glass. Panic, absolute and primal, overrides the frostbite searing his palms. Elias screams, a raw, guttural sound, and rips his hands backward. The skin of his palms tears away, left frozen to the grip of the iron poker. He collapses onto his back on the dusty wooden floorboards, clutching his bleeding, raw hands to his chest. He scrambles backward, his heels kicking frantically against the grain of the wood, his eyes wide in absolute horror as he watches the mirror. The somnambulist now holds the iron poker entirely on its side of the glass. The entity stands in the reflection, its eyes still peacefully, tightly shut. It tilts its head as if admiring the weight of the weapon. Then it raises the iron poker and swings it at the glass from the inside. Crash. This time the glass shatters, but it does not fall. A jagged, yawning hole erupts in the center of the massive frame, but the shards of heavy, silver-backed mirror remain suspended in midair, floating weightlessly around the perimeter of the breach. The boundary is broken. The air pressure in the master bedroom equalizes with a violent, rushing hiss, sucking the stale, dusty air of Harrowgate House into the freezing void of the mirrored dimension. A cloud of white vapor pours out of the jagged opening, cascading down the wooden frame and spilling across the floorboards like heavy dry ice. The temperature in the bedroom plummets past freezing. The yellowing canvas drop cloths covering the furniture rapidly stiffen as frost crystallizes across their fabric. From the billowing white vapor steps a single, bare, impossibly pale foot. It crosses the wooden threshold of the mahogany frame and steps onto the real floorboards of the master bedroom. The somnambulist has breached. It steps fully into the room. It is a perfect, terrifying physical duplicate of Elia's thorn, but stripped of all life, warmth, and vitality. Its skin is the color of old chalk stretched tight over prominent bones. It wears the exact same clothing, a threadbare button-down shirt and dark trousers, but the fabric hangs loosely, devoid of movement as if carved from stone, and its eyes remain firmly, immovably shut. It stands in the center of the room, surrounded by the floating shards of the broken mirror, and takes a deep, ragged breath. The sound is horrific, a wet, rattling inhalation that sounds like air being dragged through a crushed trachea. It is smelling the room. It is tasting the fear. Elias cannot breathe. His chest is a tight cage of agonizing pressure. His heart, already strained to the absolute breaking point by days of forced insomnia, begins to flutter erratically, a sickening, uneven rhythm that sends waves of nausea and lightheadedness crashing over him. The left side of his jaw tingles with a cold, creeping numbness. The heart, he realizes with a spike of pure despair. My uncle's heart. It's giving out. The somnambulist slowly turns its head. Though entirely blind, its face locks exactly onto Elias' position on the floor. It drops the iron poker. The heavy metal hits the floorboards with a dull, heavy thud that rattles the floor joists. It takes a step toward him. Its movement is entirely soundless. No floorboard creaks beneath its weight, no fabric rustles. It moves through the physical space like a shadow cast by a dying star. Elias forces his failing body to obey. He rolls onto his side, ignoring the searing agony in his flayed palms, and pushes himself up. He doesn't look back. He throws himself out of the master bedroom and into the second-floor hallway. He runs, but it is a pathetic, desperate stumble. His legs feel as though they are submerged in wet concrete. His vision tunnels, the edges of his sight blurring into a deep, velvety darkness. Every beat of his heart is a sharp, stabbing pain radiating down his left arm. He reaches the grand staircase. He grips the mahogany banister, leaving a smear of fresh blood from his torn hands on the polished wood. As he begins to descend, the house itself begins to betray him. The architecture of Harrowgate House, bathed in the suffocating darkness of the night, is no longer fixed. The boundary broken in the master bedroom has infected the physical reality of the structure. Elias looks down the staircase, but the ground floor foyer seems impossibly distant, stretching out like the view through the wrong end of a telescope. The stairs multiply, spiraling downward into an abyss of shadow. He looks at the walls. The portraits of his forgotten ancestors have changed. They are no longer facing forward. Every single painted figure has turned its back, showing only the dark velvet of their Victorian coats and the elaborate braids of their hair. They refuse to witness what is happening. Keep moving, Elias tells himself, his internal voice screaming over the roaring rush of blood in his ears. If you stop, you sleep. If you sleep, you die. He practically falls down the stairs, his bare feet sliding on the threadbare runner rug. He hits the landing halfway down, his shoulder slamming hard against the wall. The impact forces a wet cough from his lungs. He tastes copper-fresh blood pooling in the back of his throat. Above him, at the top of the stairs, a profound, heavy silence descends. Elias freezes on the landing, peering up into the darkness. There are no footsteps. There is no heavy breathing. There is only the absolute, consuming absence of sound. The somnambulist does not need to run. It does not tire. It knows exactly where he is because it is tethered to his very consciousness. Elias forces himself down the remaining stairs, the foyer finally coming into sharp, terrifying focus. He hits the ground floor and stumbles toward the back of the house, bypassing the kitchen, bypassing his uncle's study. He needs a place to hide, a place to compress himself, to wait out the horrific failure of his own body. He finds the cloakroom, a narrow, windowless closet tucked beneath the grand staircase, designed for the heavy winter coats of a bygone era. He pulls the heavy wooden door open and throws himself inside, pulling it shut behind him. The darkness is absolute. It is a thick, impenetrable blackness that instantly suffocates his senses. The air smells overpoweringly of mothballs, damp wool, and dust. He collapses against the back wall, burying himself beneath a heavy pile of old, fur-lined coats that had fallen from their brass hooks. He pulls his knees to his chest, wrapping his bleeding hands around his shins, and presses his face against his knees. He must remain absolutely silent. He must remain perfectly still. But most importantly, he must remain awake. In the total darkness of the cloakroom, the deprivation of his senses forces his exhausted brain into overdrive. The microsleeps return with vicious intensity. His eyelids droop. They are leaden, lined with sandpaper. He blinks. 1 second of darkness. In that single second, a vivid, hypnagogic hallucination explodes in his mind. He sees the somnambulist standing right in front of him, its dead, chalk-white face mere inches from his own, its mouth open in a silent scream. Elias violently jerks his eyes open, his head cracking against the wooden paneling behind him. He bites his bottom lip, biting down hard enough to break the skin, relishing the sharp, coppery pain that grounds him in reality. Awake, I am awake. He focuses on his hearing. The house is quiet, but it is not silent. It is settling. The floorboards above him creak with the natural shifting of old wood. The wind outside whistles faintly through the mortar of the bricks. And then a new sound emerges. It is a faint, rhythmic asterisk swish, swish, swish. It is the sound of bare feet dragging lightly across the floorboards of the foyer, slow, purposeful. It is hunting him, not by sight, for its eyes are closed, not by sound, for Elias is making none. It is hunting the fading electrical signals of his dying brain. It is tracking his exhaustion. The more tired Elias becomes, the brighter he burns in the somnambulist's blind vision. The dragging footsteps move past the parlor. They pause by the kitchen. Elias' heart is misfiring violently now, skipping beats, then racing in a frantic, terrifying sprint before stuttering to a near halt. He is in the throes of a massive cardiac event brought on by pure, unadulterated terror and chronic sleep deprivation. He is dying in a closet beneath the stairs. The footsteps resume. They are moving toward the hallway that houses the cloakroom. Swish, swish, swish. They stop. The silence that follows is heavier than the darkness. Elias stops breathing. He presses his face so hard into his knees that his vision explodes with white static. He knows, with absolute, horrifying certainty, that the entity is standing directly outside the cloakroom door. There is only a single inch of wood separating his failing, terrified body from the dead, walking reflection. He can feel the cold radiating through the wood, chilling the air inside the closet so rapidly that his breath begins to plume in the absolute blackness. He strains his ears. He listens for the sound of the brass doorknob turning. Nothing happens. Seconds drag into eternity. The entity does not try to open the door. It does not slam against the wood. It simply waits. It knows. It doesn't need to break in. It just needs to wait for Elias' body to finally surrender. It needs him to close his eyes for good. The physical toll of fighting the exhaustion becomes unbearable. Elias' head lolls to the side. The pain in his chest is a crushing, dull ache that threatens to pull him under into the sweet, painless void of unconsciousness. His eyelids flutter. They begin to slide down, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. He cannot stop them. His willpower is a frayed thread snapping under the weight of an anvil. Through the tiny slit of his remaining vision in the pitch-black closet, he notices a thin line of pale, sickly light at the very bottom of the door. The light flickers, and then from under the crack of the door, a thick, dark, viscous liquid begins to slowly pool into the cloakroom. It seeps across the wooden floorboards, reflecting the faint ambient light. It smells overpoweringly of old copper and decay. The entity is not just waiting. It is bleeding into the real world. Elia's eyes slide shut. The moment his eyelids close, the brass doorknob on the cloakroom door violently twists with a sharp, deafening asterisk clack asterisk. The heavy brass doorknob of the cloakroom does not simply turn. It violently snaps, the internal locking mechanism shearing with the loud, sharp report of a gunshot. The heavy oak door is ripped outward, tearing off its lower hinge with a screech of tortured metal. The absolute, suffocating darkness of Elia's sanctuary is instantly obliterated by the sickly, ambient yellow light bleeding in from the foyer. Elias has no time to scream. He has barely registered that his eyes had slipped shut. A hand cold as deep earth marble and terrifyingly strong clamps around his left ankle. The grip is absolute, the long, pale fingers biting through the fabric of his trousers and sinking into the muscle of his calf. He is violently yanked from the closet. The pile of heavy, moth-eaten coats tumbles out with him, a chaotic avalanche of fur and wool. Elias hits the hardwood floor of the foyer with bone-jarring force. The impact knocks the remaining, precious breath from his lungs, leaving him gasping like a beached fish. His head cracks against the baseboard, sending a shower of white-hot sparks across his vision. Before he can even attempt to crawl away, the entity is upon him. The somnambulist straddles Elia's chest. The weight of the creature is impossible. It does not feel like flesh and bone, but rather like being crushed beneath a monolithic slab of cold stone. Elias stares up, his eyes wide, his pupils blown wide with pure, unfiltered terror. The entity's face is mere inches from his own. The proximity is a profound violation of the senses. It smells of century-old dust, of dried lavender turning to rot, and heavily of raw, metallic silver like the taste of a bleeding gum, amplified 1,000 times. Its eyes remain perfectly, flawlessly sealed. The pale skin of its eyelids is thin, almost translucent, revealing the faint, bluish network of dead veins beneath. Slowly, the somnambulist raises its hands. It places its long, freezing thumbs directly over Elia's frantic, wide-open eyes. It intends to push. It intends to force his eyelids permanently shut. If I sleep, I die. If I close my eyes, it takes my place. The thought is a sharp, desperate flare in the fading embers of Elia's consciousness. As the freezing thumbs press down, threatening to crush his globes back into his skull, the sheer, primal instinct for survival overrides the catastrophic failure of his heart. Elia's right hand, slick with his own blood from his flayed palm, blindly scrambles across the floorboards. His fingers brush against cold, jagged metal one of the heavy, rusted brass coat hooks that had torn away from the cloakroom wall during the violent extraction. He grips it. The rusted edge bites into his exposed nerves, but he welcomes the blinding pain. It is an anchor. With a guttural, wet roar that tears his vocal cords, Elias drives the rusted brass hook upward, plunging it directly into the side of the somnambulist's neck. The entity does not scream. It does not possess a voice. Instead, a sound erupts from its throat that mirrors the shattering of a massive pane of ice, a deep, resonant, grinding crack asterisk. The creature violently recoils. It does not bleed red. From the jagged puncture wound in its pale neck, a thick, viscous, mercury-like substance erupts. It is oxidized silver, black and heavy, spilling onto Elia's chest. Where it touches his shirt, the fabric instantly stiffens and freezes, snapping like brittle plastic. The entity's grip falters just enough. Elias bucks his hips with every last ounce of kinetic energy left in his failing body, throwing the heavy, stone-like weight of the reflection off him. The somnambulist crashes against the foyer wall, leaving a massive, dark smear of silver blood against the peeling Victorian wallpaper. Elias doesn't wait to see it recover. He rolls onto his stomach and begins to crawl. His legs are utterly useless, deadened by the pressure on his chest and the sheer exhaustion ravaging his central nervous system. He drags himself toward the grand staircase using only his forearms, leaving a smeared, horrific trail of his own red blood mixing with the frozen, black silver of the entity. As he reaches the bottom step, the reality of Harrowgate House begins to actively hemorrhage around him. The physical space is breaking down, infected by the shattered boundary of the master bedroom. The walls of the foyer begin to warp and stretch, the right angles of the architecture curving into impossible, dizzying geometries. The peeling damask wallpaper begins to shimmer, its texture smoothing out, turning reflective. Elias looks to his left. The wall is no longer a wall. It has become a murky, distorted mirror. In it, he sees a reflection of himself crawling. But the reflection is bloated, rotting, its eyes entirely rolled back in its skull. He looks to his right. Another reflective surface has formed where a wooden door once stood. This reflection shows Elias completely emaciated, a walking skeleton wrapped in gray, translucent skin. The house is forcing him to look at his own death, a kaleidoscope of horrific possibilities designed to break his mind. Keep climbing, he tells himself, digging his torn fingers into the threadbare runner rug of the stairs. Don't look at the walls, look at the steps. Above him, the auditory hallucinations return with a vengeance, but they are no longer just inside his head. They echo from the shifting, mirrored walls of the stairwell. It is his uncle's voice. Manic, weeping, desperate. I am awake. I am awake. I cannot close them. If I close them, the glass becomes the door. I am awake. The voice bounces around Elias, amplifying his own terror. His heart gives another sickening, violent lurch. His chest tightens so severely he can no longer draw a full breath. He is subsisting on shallow, rapid gasps that burn his throat. His left arm goes completely, entirely numb, a heavy, dead appendage dragging uselessly behind him. He is having a massive myocardial infarction. He is dying on the stairs. Behind him, from the floor of the foyer, comes the sound of movement. It is not the silent, gliding step of the sleeper anymore. The entity has been wounded. The rusted brass hook is still embedded in its neck, leaking heavy black silver. The sound is a wet, heavy drag. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. The somnambulist has retrieved the heavy iron fire poker from where it dropped it. It is dragging the metal tip across the floorboards as it begins to follow Elias up the stairs. Elias pulls himself up to the landing. The air here is no longer just cold, it is Arctic. Every exhalation crystallizes instantly in front of his face, falling to the floor like fine snow. The ambient light of the house has been entirely swallowed. The only illumination comes from a sickly, pale, luminescent glow radiating from the open door of the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Elias knows he cannot outrun it. He cannot outcrawl it. He cannot overpower a creature that feels no pain, that does not breathe, and that only seeks to permanently close his eyes. The journals. His uncle's frantic scribblings flash through his dying mind. If I break the glass, do I break the cage? Or do I just remove the door? Elias had removed the door. He had allowed the reflection to step into the physical space. But a reflection, by its very nature, is a parasite of light and surface. It cannot exist without a medium. The somnambulist had pulled itself out of the silver, but its tether was still the glass. Elias forces himself to his feet. He leans heavily against the warping, shimmering wall of the second-floor hallway, using it for balance. He drags his dead left leg, shuffling agonizingly slowly toward the pale light of the master bedroom. Behind him, the dragging of the iron poker reaches the top of the stairs. Scrape. Elias does not look back. He falls through the heavy, vine-carved doorframe of the master bedroom. The room has been completely transformed. It is no longer a Victorian bedroom. It is an epicenter of a frozen, localized hurricane. The thick white vapor pouring from the gaping hole in the massive mirror frame has filled the room waist-deep, swirling in slow, hypnotic eddies. The furniture, the four-poster bed, the draped armchairs are coated in inches of thick, solid rime ice. But the most impossible sight is the shattered mirror itself. The massive shards of heavy, silver-backed glass that Elias had broken with the iron poker have not fallen to the floor. They are suspended in midair, floating in a slow, planetary orbit around the black, gaping void of the empty mahogany frame. They drift weightlessly, reflecting the moonlight and the pale luminescence of the breach, casting fragmented, chaotic shards of light across the walls. Elias stumbles forward, the thick white vapor swirling around his waist. He hears the heavy, dead footstep of the somnambulist entering the room behind him. He has only seconds. He looks at the floating shards. He needs a piece of the cage. He needs a piece of the original silver. He reaches out with his bleeding right hand. A massive, jagged shard of glass, roughly the length and shape of a medieval broadsword, slowly rotates past his face. Elias grabs it. The moment his skin makes contact with the floating shard, the weightlessness vanishes. Gravity instantly reclaims the glass. It is incredibly heavy, dragging his arm down. The jagged, unpolished edge of the shard slices deeply into the web of his thumb, but he barely feels it over the crushing, systemic agony of his failing heart. He grips the massive, jagged shard of mirror like a shield, turning slowly to face the door. The somnambulist stands at the threshold. It is a horrific sight. The dark, black silver continues to pulse slowly from the wound in its neck, freezing as it hits the shoulder of its shirt. Its chalk-white face remains entirely impassive, its eyes stubbornly, violently closed. In its pale hands it grips the heavy iron fire poker. It steps fully into the room, its bare feet leaving perfect dark footprints in the waist-deep white vapor. It stops 10 feet from Elias. It tilts its head, looking at him with its closed eyes. It senses the glass in Elias' hand. It senses the piece of its own cage. For the first time, the entity's expression changes. The terrifying, subtle smile fades, replaced by a deep, twisting grimace of pure, unadulterated malice. It raises the heavy iron poker high above its head, the rusted metal catching the fragmented moonlight. Elias stands his ground, his knees trembling violently, his vision narrowing to a tiny, dark tunnel. He raises the massive shard of broken mirror, the silver backing facing the creature, pointing the jagged, mirrored tip directly at the center of the entity's chest. "If you want my eyes," Elias thinks, his heart stuttering toward its final, inevitable failure, "you will have to open yours to take them." The somnambulist lunges forward, bringing the iron poker down with the force of a falling guillotine. Title: The Somnambulist's Mirror Part 5. The waking nightmare, the heavy iron fire poker descends with the brutal, blinding speed of a falling guillotine. Elias Thorne does not attempt to dodge. He has nothing left. His physical form is a decaying vessel, rapidly failing under the catastrophic weight of a massive myocardial infarction. His vision is a pinprick of light surrounded by a crushing, velvet darkness. He braces the massive, jagged shard of silver-backed mirror with both hands, pointing the mirrored surface outward, and waits for the impact. The collision is cataclysmic. The rusted iron does not shatter the mirror shard. Instead, as metal meets the arcane silver backing of the glass, a concussive shockwave of absolute zero temperature detonates in the center of the master bedroom. The sound is not a crash. It is the deafening, subsonic toll of a massive underwater bell. The kinetic force travels instantly down the iron shaft, down the mirror shard, and into Elias' forearms. He hears the sharp, wet snap of his own right radius bone fracturing under the pressure, but the pain is entirely eclipsed by the agonizing, twisting spasms of his dying heart. The impact knocks Elias backward. His bare feet slide across the ice-slicked floorboards and he falls hard, crashing onto his back in the waist-deep, swirling white vapor. The somnambulist stands over him. The rusted hook Elias had driven into its neck is still leaking heavy black silver, the viscous fluid freezing into dark stalactites as it drips onto the floor. The entity's chalk-white face is twisted into a mask of silent, predatory fury, but its eyes remain stubbornly, horrifically sealed. It raises the iron poker again. Elias tries to lift his arms. His right arm is a dead, shattered weight. His left hand is slick with his own arterial blood, his grip on the massive mirror shard slipping. His breathing is no longer bringing in oxygen. It is a desperate, wet rattling in the back of his throat. The left side of his body is entirely paralyzed, numb and useless. "I am dying," Elias realizes. The thought is remarkably, beautifully calm. The frantic terror of the past 4 days begins to evaporate, replaced by the heavy, suffocating blanket of terminal exhaustion. The somnambulist does not swing the poker immediately. It pauses. It tilts its head, sensing the rapid deceleration of Elias' heartbeat. It senses the ultimate surrender. The entity lowers the iron weapon, letting the heavy tip rest against the frozen floorboards. It drops to its knees, straddling Elias in the freezing vapor. The creature leans down, bringing its terrifying, blind face mere inches from Elias. The smell of raw, oxidized silver and centuries-old dust fills Elias' failing lungs. The entity raises its pale, marble-cold hands and delicately places its thumbs against Elias' cheekbones, right beneath his eyes. It is waiting. It is waiting for the exact moment Elia's heart stops. The moment Elias closes his eyes in death, the tether will snap, and the somnambulist will permanently claim the waking world. Elias looks up at the creature's sealed eyelids. He can see the faint, dark outline of the pupils darting frantically beneath the thin, translucent skin. His eyelids are impossibly heavy. They flutter, struggling against gravity, struggling against the final failure of his central nervous system, if you want them. Elias thinks, the final electrical impulses of his brain firing in a desperate, suicidal gambit. You will have to look at me. Elias lets out his final, agonizing breath. He stops fighting the paralysis. He lets his broken right arm fall entirely limp. But with the very last remnant of kinetic energy in his fading body, Elias tightens his bloody left hand around the jagged mirror shard. He does not swing it. He does not stab. He simply twists his wrist upward, bringing the silver-backed reflective surface of the massive glass shard directly between his own face and the hovering face of the entity. And then, Elias Thorne closes his eyes. The silence that falls over Harrowgate House is absolute. It is the silence of a vacuum, the stillness of the void. Elias' heart gives one final, pathetic quiver against his ribs and then stops entirely. The excruciating pain in his chest vanishes. The freezing cold dissipates. He slips into the deep, welcoming, infinite dark of permanent slumber. In the physical world, the reaction is instantaneous. The moment Elias' eyes close, the metaphysical laws governing the parasitic entity invert. The somnambulist is a creature of the blind eye, a predator that walks only when the host sleeps. By dying with his eyes closed, Elias has permanently entered the state of sleep, which means the reflection must wake. For the first time in centuries, the somnambulist's eyes twitch. The pale, translucent skin of its eyelids stretches taut. With a sound like tearing parchment, the entity's eyes snap violently open. They are not human eyes. They are deep, terrifying spheres of liquid, reflective mercury, swirling with absolute, consuming darkness. The entity draws its first true breath of waking air, a sharp, ragged gasp that fills its dead lungs. It has won. It has inherited the physical realm. But as its mercury eyes focus on the physical world for the very first time, it looks directly downward. It does not see Elias' dead face. Because Elias had placed the mirror shard directly beneath the creature's chin, the very first thing the newly awakened somnambulist sees is its own reflection staring back at it from the silvered glass. The paradox is catastrophic. The entity is a parasite of the unreflection. It exists only in the absence of a waking gaze. To look upon itself with open eyes is to force a metaphysical short circuit, a collision of matter and antimatter within the architecture of the supernatural. The somnambulist freezes. The liquid mercury of its eyes widens in absolute, unadulterated horror. A high-pitched, oscillating frequency begins to build in the master bedroom, a sound so shrill and violent that the remaining windows of Harrowgate House instantly shatter outward, raining 1,000 pieces of glass onto the dead moors below. The somnambulist opens its mouth, unhinging its jaw to an impossible width, and unleashes a scream that vibrates the very mortar holding the house together. The massive shard of mirror in Elias' dead hand begins to glow with a blinding, searing white light. The reflection of the entity inside the glass reaches out, but it does not reach out into the room. The reflection reaches its arms backward into the depths of the mirror, and it pulls. The physical body of the somnambulist begins to violently warp. Its pale skin stretches and tears, drawn toward the glowing surface of the jagged shard like dust sucked into a vacuum. The heavy black silver pulsing from its neck atomizes into a dark mist. The creature thrashes, clawing frantically at the frozen floorboards, leaving deep gouges in the heavy oak. But the pull of its own reflection is absolute. With a final, deafening implosion that sucks the white vapor from the room in a single rush of displaced air, the somnambulist is violently dragged headfirst into the jagged shard of glass. The glowing light snaps out. The massive shards of the broken-looking glass that had been floating weightlessly in the center of the room suddenly lose their suspension. Gravity reclaims them. They crash to the wooden floorboards in a chaotic, glittering avalanche of destruction, shattering into millions of tiny, harmless fragments. The silence returns, heavy, earthly, complete. The sky above the English countryside is bruised with the colors of dawn-pale pinks and weak, watery yellows breaking through the oppressive slate-gray clouds. The thick, pea-soup fog that had swallowed the moors the night before has burned away, leaving the landscape looking damp and exhausted. Harrowgate House stands tall against the pale morning light. From the outside, it looks perfectly normal, an imposing Victorian structure holding centuries of forgotten secrets behind its heavy slate roof and blackened brick. The old, mud-splattered Volvo estate car sits in the driveway, covered in a heavy layer of morning dew. Harrowgate House, foyer continuous asterisk. The interior of the house is entirely still. The ambient temperature has returned to a normal, damp chill. The bizarre, warping geometries of the walls have vanished. The peeling damask wallpaper is just wallpaper again. The heavy scent of oxidized silver and decay has faded, replaced by the mundane smell of dust and old wood. The morning sun cuts through the dirt-caked windows, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing lazily in the beams of light. The only evidence of the nightmare is the physical destruction. The cloakroom door lies entirely off its hinges, surrounded by a pile of moth-eaten coats. A trail of dried, rust-colored blood streaks across the foyer floorboards, leading up the grand staircase. Master bedroom continuous asterisk. The master bedroom is an abattoir of shattered glass. The heavy, blackened mahogany frame of the massive looking glass stands completely empty against the far wall. The floor is covered in a glittering ocean of silver-backed shards, crunching softly as the floorboards naturally shift in the morning warmth. In the center of the room, lying flat on his back amongst the broken glass, is Elias Thorne. He is dead. His body is pale and entirely rigid. His right arm lies broken at an unnatural angle. His left hand is coated in dried blood, but his face is completely transformed. The deep, bruised purple stains beneath his eyes are gone. The sharp, frantic tension in his jaw has melted away. The agonizing lines of stress and terror have been smoothed out. Elias looks younger. He looks incredibly, profoundly peaceful. His eyes are gently, firmly closed. For the first time in years, Elias Thorne is finally getting some sleep. The camera slowly pans away from his serene face, moving down his body, tracing the line of his left arm. His bloody fingers are still loosely curled around the massive, jagged shard of the mirror he had used to break the paradox. The camera zooms in on the surface of the shard. The morning sunlight hits the silver backing, creating a perfect, flawless reflection. It reflects the peeling wallpaper of the bedroom ceiling. It reflects the dusty wooden beams. And deep within the glass, hovering just beneath the surface of the silver, is a figure. It is Elias, but this version of Elias is not peaceful. His clothes are immaculate, free of blood or dust. His skin is pale, chalky white, and his eyes are wide open. They are stretched impossibly wide, revealing the bloodshot sclera, the pupils blown completely out in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. He is slamming his fists against the inside of the glass, his mouth open in a frantic, eternal, soundless scream. He is trapped in the silver. He is trapped in the silence. He is awake, and he will never, ever sleep again.